Okay, so hi everyone. Tonight we are going to discuss the most difficult question that has ever been asked by anyone ever. Not just to me, although I've been asked this a number of times, but also in world history of every theologian, every rabbi, priest, whatever you want to say, has had this question asked to them and has wanted an answer. What question am I talking about? When am I going to get married? No, not that one. No, that's totally impossible to answer. The question we're looking at tonight is why bad things happen to good people. And that is probably like the biggest question. I'm going to give you an answer, and then I'm going to explain my answer, and then we're going to take questions, thoughts, ideas. And then I'm going to make a few caveats with this topic as well, because this is a big one, right? I mean, put your hands up if you've ever asked this question before. In your mind, at least. Never? Yeah. I thought so. I'm going to give you the answer. And the answer actually is really very, very simple. Are you ready? The answer is, I don't know. That's the answer to the question. That is not a get out. That actually is the answer to the question. I don't know. Nobody knows. We may know why certain things happen to nations, why wars begin, that we can discuss. But why any particular individual has to go through any amount of suffering, we don't know. Having said that, if I were to stop the class right here and now, you'd all be like, this rabbi is one big loser. He had the opportunity to teach us something, and instead just said, I don't know, and let's drink beer. Which I'm okay with, by the way. I like beer. Having said that, what we are going to look at tonight are five actually, classic answers to these questions from Jewish thought, and probably not only Jewish thought. Other theologians have tackled this and thought about it, but let me be very, very clear and give you a very strict caveat. No matter how good or bad these answers we look at today are in your mind, what's really important, sorry, he left the door open because he's a naughty rabbi. Oh, you just give that door a pull? Oh, thank you, my dear, sorry.
Oh.
Your timing was perfect. How did it happen to you? I don't know. Whatever it is, Shira, whatever it is. Oh, when you leave, could you close the door, please? Do you mind? Thank you so much. That's right. Give it a good pull. God bless you. We don't want more accidents to happen. Thanks. Whatever the answer is, and you're convinced by it, you don't like it, none of my business, because we're going to look at answers. None of the answers are as good as the question. Okay? Sometimes my answers are better than the question. This is not one of those occasions. No matter how convincing they may be or consoling, you are not permitted, or it is very ill-advised, I should say, to approach someone who's going through any form of suffering, what you may consider small, a broken nail, losing their keys, which for me is like the biggest tragedy. I've spent probably 6 months of my life looking for keys, not in one block, but over my lifespan, and say, well, this is why you're going what you go through. Which is why there is an interesting law that when you go to the house of an Aval, a person mourning, you are not allowed to talk unless you are spoken to. Your job is not there to be like, oh, it'll be okay. Who are you to say that? This person is mourning, and they're entitled to come over their mourning when they are well and ready. So that is completely unacceptable. So don't go home and like, I know why we lost all that money. It's because blah, blah, blah. You keep your mouth shut. That's what you do. Having said that, let's try to see how some scholars have tried to answer this question from the Jewish world. The first person we discuss actually is Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu asked this question to God. And he said, God, tell me your ways. Explain to me how it can be that we have a person who's a tzaddik, Varalo, a righteous person that bad things happen to. Shifra is a lovely girl. Why does she have to get a knock on her head? And you know what God said to Moses? Moses, the holiest Jew, the greatest prophet that ever lived throughout Jewish history. He said to him, be quiet. You're never going to understand. You are mortal. I am not. No mortal can see and understand why something terrible actually happens. And on that note, there was a news article that came up on my Facebook news feed today. And you can check at home. This came out today. And I had to print it out. It was in the Times of Israel because it was, sadly, a funny story that fits in perfectly with tonight's topic. So it's all Men Shemayim. Right? And this was the topic, and yet this is a news article from today. And the title of this article is, Man Seeks Restraining Order Against God. Times of Israel. What's the date today? May 4th, 2016. An Israeli man has petitioned the Haifa Magistrates Court for a restraining order against God, claiming the Almighty has been particularly unkind to him. It's a real article, I know. There's no onion. The initiator of the request, a resident of the northern port city, represented himself in court, the Walla news site reported on Wednesday. That's today, right? A protocol of the hearing noted that God did not turn up for the session, although it did not specify how the court determined the omnipresent was not in fact there, as opposed to merely exercising the right to remain silent. This is a real story. Only in Israel, right? Yes. The petitioner, who was not named in the report, noted that he had tried to obtain the restraining order from police for the past 3 years, but the police had merely sent a patrol car to his home on 10 occasions. He argued, it's funny but it's also sad, that over a 3-year period God had exhibited a seriously negative attitude towards him, although details of what divine mischief he had borne the brunt of were not mentioned in the report. Presiding Judge Ahsan Kanaan, it's a great name, denied the request, which he said was ludicrous, asserting the applicant needed help not from the court but from other sources. The report did not include a response to the outcome from any of the multitude of available spokespeople on behalf of the Lord. I gave you an answer to the question. I then said that Moses had the same question. He was given the same answer by God, meaning even the great Moshe Rabbeinu was not going to figure it out. People have justifiable grievances against God. And in most cases they are. Oh, this guy's probably a nut. But that's not the point. Someone, however, in the Torah did have a terrible, terrible thing happen to him. And that was Moses' older brother, whose name was Aaron. And Aaron had 4 sons. And his sons were great, great people. 2 of his sons made a very big mistake. There's different opinions what that mistake was, but it ended up them losing their lives. According to one opinion, they got drunk at a very inappropriate time. But we'll leave that aside. They died. And it wasn't a person that killed them that they could be blamed. It came from divine punishment. It was determined that that's the way it happened. Aaron gave a response. And his response was silence. The Yidam Aaron, he accepted it. And he's seen as a very great person. He didn't argue, he didn't fight. This was the great Aaron, the lover of peace, the lover of shalom. That's what he was known as, more than his brother. He was rodef shalom, he chased after it. And yet his 2 sons, who by the way, the sources tell us were on the same caliber of Moses and Aaron, they had to die. Losing children, lo aleinu, I've met such people, there is nothing worse. No one should ever have to experience this. For us, the Jewish people, maybe other religions see it as a great thing, a great merit, if kids are willing to kill themselves for God. For us, terrible, terrible thing. And yet, he was able to accept, he was upset. He wasn't running around joyously chanting. He was very, very upset. But he was able somehow to keep quiet at that time. Which, by the way, reminds us of a food that we eat in a house of mourning. What food do we classically eat in a house of mourning? Before the bagels and lox turn up, what do we eat? An egg. Why do we eat an egg? Why do we eat an egg in a household? You heard this before? Eggs or some kind of lentils. This is the classic food. There's two reasons that I know of. One reason is eggs are round. There's an up and a down. Right now you're down, there's an up. And sometimes you're up and there's also a down. There's a cyclical nature to life. Some people have lentils, which is why Jacob made his father, Isaac, lentils when his father, Abraham, died. That's when Esau came and bought the birthright for a bowl of beans. They're round and they represent the cycle of life. There are ups and downs. Just that's what life is. Another reason is an egg is closed. It has no opening. Has no mouth. The morn has no mouth. Like Aaron. What can I say? What can I say? With that in mind, and that happens to be this week's Torah portion, coincidentally enough, although I didn't even realize it when I put the title down, I mentioned it because tonight is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, which probably is like the classic date where we mourn the death. I won't call it the tragedy. A tragedy is a flood, an earthquake, a volcano erupting, an atrocity that was perpetrated against our family. Okay? So once again, we don't tell these things to people. This is purely a logical thought or understanding to an emotional subject. There is no answer to emotion. Emotion does not take logical answers. But we're going to try to remove ourselves a little bit from Jewish thought and see how the rabbis try to understand it. So, number one of the 5 is we don't have the full picture. We just don't know what else is happening and what other possible benefits or ripples are going to come out of this event. Now, all of you here are adults. I'm not dealing with children. All of you, I'm sure at this point in your lives, could look back to a devastating, terrible, tragic event that happened in your life and say at the time it was miserable. It was horrible. I was crying. There was mascara coming down. I had snot bubbles. The whole thing was terrible, terrible. And yet, it actually came out pretty good. And I learned something from it. I don't want it to happen again. But there's a picture over here. There's a past. There's a present. There's a future. And somehow, what's happened to me, I can see could affect me and other people in a positive way. That is number one. We don't see all the repercussions. It could be, I mean, there's just so many scenarios you can make up. I'll just think of one. It could be the one person goes through a painful experience, has to go for help somewhere, someone else gets involved in their life, they end up learning from that experience so that when they go through it, their personality is built through it. It could be that you become the person that ends up taking that information and bringing solace to others, but no one else will give solace to someone else because they have to go through it for their reasons, unless you went through it or unless your family went through it. I mean, have you all experienced that at one point in your life? Where you were rejected, you were hurt, someone stole something from you, someone hurt you, someone punched you, and somehow you were like, there's something good that came out of it. I don't understand fully why it happened, and I don't want it to happen again, because it was not pleasant. But in terms of seeing a full picture, that experience has helped me as an individual. Life lessons usually don't come through nice stuff. Marriages and dating usually aren't built by the fun stuff. By going to the movies and hanging out at the restaurant and hanging out with friends and going for drinks. That's the stuff that just kind of happens. Relationships with each other build by the bad stuff and how we overcome those things. That's generally how relationships work with each other, with ourselves, and with God. Questions, comments on anything I said so far? This is not going to be a long class. I really don't have too much to say on this topic because I still struggle with it on a daily basis. Because I know this information is coming from my book, You Got Questions, where I put this question down in there, and I wrote a book, and this is a chapter of it. And yet, when I lose my keys, I'm like, oh, it's all good. But where are my keys? Why are my socks odd? What's going on over here? What's happening? Where? That's not helping me. I'm just saying, none of this helps me to overcome these challenging things. Afterwards, I get a fleeting moment of, okay, maybe something. But still. Doesn't really help. Having said that, I must tell you true stories of people I know. Because I could not do it. Maybe that's why I thank God not to go through this. I know a family in Israel whose son, a young boy, Kobe Mandel, was killed by Palestinian children. I think bludgeoned to death with a rock, I believe, is the right way to put it. Devastating for any parent. His parents somehow managed to recover from this, and they took that pain, whatever you want to call it, which we can't even fathom, and they created a camp from it. And they have kids come to this camp, and they've made this terrible, terrible event in their lives. And I don't think they would have actually done this had this not happened to them. Again, if you were to ask them, which I've not done, I don't have the chutzpah to do it, but I guess if you ask them, would you rather have your son back or have a camp? They'd be like, I'd rather have my son back and no camp. But that's not a choice they have. They just weren't asked that as an option. Their son was taken away from them in a very ruthless and despicable piece of terrorist atrocity. And yet they were able to, they're not happy about the situation, but they were able to create a whole new life for a lot of other people. And you've all heard stories of people who lose kids and build institutions based upon their life experiences. You know, there was a famous journalist, a Jewish guy called Norman Cousins, who suffered from, he was actually a journalist, political activist. He suffered from terrible arthritis, terrible pain, suffering terribly in hospital for days. And people would visit him, and they would bring him toys and stuff. They would bring him books and bring him games and stuff, that, you know, food. And someone bought him a Marx Brothers cassette. You know the Marx Brothers? You know the Marx Brothers there? You know the comedians, the Marx Brothers? Groucho, Chico, Harpo, Karl. He's the funniest, by the way, Karl Marx. That book on the proletarian bourgeoisie gets me every time. I don't know how he does it. Oh, God. Anyway, he said the more he watched this stuff, the more he laughed, the better he felt. Like the laugh actually gave him an anesthetic feel. So much so he actually fundraised and created a whole place in UCLA, one of the hospitals over there, on the holistic manifestation, connection between the spirit, the emotion, and pain relief. Right? And now hospitals should become more light. You know, we see this actually. There's a movie, Patch Adams. Right? The idea that, when we grew up in that hospitals were very anesthetic, right? You know, very cold, like unicolor places, and now they're very more lively. You realize that there's another approach to healing over here. That's another discussion of the power of comedy, which is another discussion, not for now. A topic I'm obsessed with, but not for now. Okay. But people go through terrible things. They're able to take it somehow and able to turn it into something unbelievable, which would not have happened had they not gone through what they went through. So that's number one. Answer number 2 of 5 is, most evil comes from people, not from God. Okay? Let's look at the Holocaust. Now, once again, I'm not here, I'm very clear. I'm not going to give any understanding of why that happened. I've been to Auschwitz, I've been to Birkenau a number of times, I've been with Holocaust survivors. I would never do such a thing. Having said that, the atrocities were perpetrated by people. Now, you could still ask, God could have stopped it if he wanted to. That's a fair point. Why God didn't stop these terrible things happening, that question still stands. Oh, by the way, this question of why bad things happen to good people only makes sense as a question if there is a God. If there's no God, and there's no planner, and no one's controlling and running the world and opening opportunities and stopping or not stopping things, then why shouldn't bad things happen to good people? Everything's random. Things happen by chance. So you have a good person who gets brain cancer and dies, right? And you have a bad person who wins the lottery and becomes a disgusting person with lots of money the rest of their life. If there's no God, no plan, no planner, then the whole question makes no sense. Bad things happen to good people is only a question when there is some kind of higher power running the world. Does that make sense? Otherwise, we have no question at all.
It's not a question that you can't ask it, because then you just accept that it's random.
Right.
If you don't accept that it's random.
Exactly. It's random. Randomly, if I put enough, I don't know, throw enough arrows, shoot enough arrows, eventually someone's going to hit. Why? It's all random. You just happen in the wrong place at the wrong time. So you can't ask, oh, why did they hit with the arrow? There's no reason. It's just completely random. So the whole premise is that there's a God that's allowing this to happen or not stopping it to happen. Is that? That's I think a theological postulate, really. It's a given. So most bad things happen from evil people. They decide. Now, connected to this question is free will. Do people really have free will? And that's a whole different discussion which I can't get into now. But I'm going to give you the answer anyway in one sentence. The answer is yes. People do have free will in one area. One window they have free will, and that is making ethical decisions about their life. Now, this is a massive topic of which tons has been written, but Judaism does accept people have free will. People can give up their free will if they get really, really bad. At some point, they just become a weapon, right? A tool that God uses to inflict. But they had to work very hard to get to that point. That didn't just happen. They had to work very hard. Some people are so good that they actually give up their free will. And we've all done that to some degree. And I'm going to assume right now, and I don't know, that none of you here have a desire to go outside and shoot the next person walking past this building. Is that a fair assumption? If you don't, please don't see me afterwards. Just leave straight away. Why not? Do you all have free will not to go outside and kill Mrs. Cohen as she walks past our building here in Manhattan? You have the free will. If you want to, could you do that right now? But you have no desire. So what you've actually done is given up your free will to do that. You have no desire. Okay, you want to strangle some people, right? And you want to ram some people with your car, but you don't have the desire right now. There are people who do have that desire. They are struggling very hard not to go outside and not kill someone. No one here, I hope. There's a few wackos, but you don't, right? You have no such desire. So therefore, you can't really be rewarded for not doing it because you gave up your free will. That free will that you have that free will. If you want to go outside and kill someone, you can do it. Okay, the consequence of your action, you're going to get arrested, lose your family, lose your job, and all the rest of it, and not be seen in, very nicely by society. But whatever is preventing you is just preventing your free will from actually wanting to do it. So you've given it, there's no desire to do it. Maybe a small, tiny desire. The reward you get for it is tiny, but for the most part, you don't have it. Okay? So we have free will to make the decision. We can get really, really bad. We can get really, really good. But for most of us, our free will decisions are there. Some people made free will decisions to hurt other people. Why God doesn't stop them, I don't know. God has his reasons, which we don't understand. But most atrocities that happen, at least in the 20th century, come from people. They may claim it's their religion. They may claim it's their voodoo doll talking to them. They may say they just want to do it. They may want to make money. Who knows? Who knows? But they made the mistake. That's answer number 2. Answer number 3 of why bad things happen to good people is this isn't the only world. We live, or there exists 2 worlds. Olam Hazeh, this physical manifestation, which the Kabbalists called Olam Asiyah, the world of action, which is the world we're in right now. But there's other worlds. And there's a place called Olam Haba, which is the future world. We don't know exactly what's going to be like. We know the Messianic era a little bit, which is a discussion for another time, which is the topic of my 3rd book, God willing, as soon as book number 2 comes out in June. But that's a whole different discussion of itself. But we do know there are 2 worlds. And what happens to us in this world affects what we become in the next world. It's not like the other religions may say you'll go somewhere and there'll be people waiting for you to please you over there, 72 of them. That's not our view of the next world. Our view of the next world is not physical. Our view of the next world, Olam Haba, although there's maybe a physical element to it, our view of the next world is whatever we create in this world. The good deeds we make in this world become the next world, our own next world. There's not like a whole bunch of, Adidas, Nike sneakers waiting for us to try on in the next world. If I get to the next world and the sneakers waiting for me, I'm going to be very upset. And I like sneakers. To tell the truth. So what happens in this world affects us in this world, but it also affects us in the next world. We are not privy to how it's going to affect us in the next world. We just don't have that information. Maybe that's what God was saying. God was saying, Moses, you don't understand, you're finite. You're locked in time and space. The next world is above time and it's above space. And therefore, you're not going to get it. Don't judge what happens to you in this world only by what you feel in this world. There's also a next world. Okay? There is a judgment. Our souls are judged. And we receive reward. And the Talmud says that even small, no, I'm not talking big irritation. I know it's Yom HaShoah and people have lost kids and all these terrible things. Even small irritations. You put your hand in your pocket and you want to take out a quarter and instead you take out a dime and you're like, that's so annoying. That's a kapara. That's affected your soul in a potentially positive way. Assuming you don't go punch someone in the face because of it. Then you've lost all the good that comes from it. But if you're able to accept, you know what? That's for a good reason. And there is no coincidence in this world. Everything happens for a purpose. There's a plan. There's a planner. This was meant to happen somehow in some way, according to most commentators. I accept it. And somehow in future, maybe this world, maybe the next world, I will see the results of it. Number 4 of 5. In order to answer this one, I would like to use an analogy, a true one, of a friend of mine. My friend I was at college with came from a very wealthy family. And he was given a credit card at college to do what he wanted with. Oh, I was right. I didn't get a credit card to do what I wanted to do at college. I was given a little bit of money in the bank account, and if it were that, that was the end of that. Anyway, this guy came from a very wealthy family. He was given a credit card. But it came with a condition. Call your mother. That was the only condition. Call your mother. And at the beginning, he was a good little Jewish boy. Hi, Yima. Hello, Ben. How are you? Oh, I'm okay. How's school? Oh, good. How's classes? Okay. Are you eating enough? Yeah. You wearing a coat? Yeah. You cleaning behind your ears? Yeah. Very good. Have a good day. Once a day. Once every 3 days. Once a week. Gets himself a girlfriend once a month. One day he comes in and he starts to freak out. What's wrong? He says, my credit card was refused. So what do you mean? Because my credit card was refused. It's not working. Do you try your other ones? I don't have any other ones. I got no money. I couldn't even buy lunch today. I'm starving. I was like, why don't you take some cash? I got no cash. I said, what are you going to do? He says, I don't know. I said, why don't you call your mother? So that's what he did. Hi, Mum. She says, Ben. Nice to hear from you. How are things going? I'm okay. A little hungry. Oh, really? Why, what's going on, Bubbler? What's wrong, my Bubbler? Mum, the credit card, it's not working. Do you know why that would be? Could you call the bank? Oh, I don't need to call the bank. I already did. I blocked your card. What? I blocked your card? Why would you do that? You didn't call me. But I'm starving hungry. Lucky you called me then. So, how are things going over there? You didn't forget your mother, did you? No. And the card gets turned on. Sometimes God wants to hear from us. And He's going to turn on the screws, because when things are going well in our lives, I know personally, I ain't calling God. When things are going smoothly, I forget all about God. I forget about my God. I forget about prayer. But suddenly the screws are turned on, and I'm getting irritated, and I'm getting hurt, and so I'm like, whoa, Hashem, please, what is going on over here? I can't handle this anymore. Oh, you remembered to call. I appreciate it. That's very, very kind of you to remember you have a Father in heaven who you should reach out to once in a while. Next time, try to reach out when things are going well. Maybe I won't have to stop the credit card. Maybe. Again, I don't know. Maybe there's other reasons why this suffering happens. I'm just telling you, that could possibly be one of the reasons. And answer number 5, which interestingly enough Does anyone know the classic book of scripture that discusses the suffering of a great person? Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Someone called Job. The book of Job, you heard of it before. It's a painful, difficult read. Job was a very holy, but by the way, different opinions who he was. One opinion was he was a Jewish guy. Another opinion was he wasn't even Jewish. He was actually a Canaanite that lived in Canaan. There's another opinion that he didn't even exist. Moses wrote this book, says the Talmud in the Tractate of Baba Basra, as an analogy, as a metaphor. It's usually, that opinion is rejected. He was a real person, says Rashi, who actually lived in the, he was a very holy non-Jew that lived. And he went through tremendous suffering. Right? The Satan wanted to make him suffer and be through pain, and he lost kids, and he lost his wealth, and he lost his house, and he went through tremendous suffering. He was left with a pile of bricks, and all he could do was pick up a tile and scratch his terrible sores that were all over his body. And he had a number of friends that approached him, tried to console him. And each one came with a different answer, some we've looked at today, as to why he was suffering. And all of them he rejected except one. One gave him an answer which he didn't reject, and he didn't really agree to it, but he kind of kept silent on it. And I believe that was the fifth friend of his, I believe, if I remember correctly. I've not read the book in a while. But this friend gave him the following answer. You're not going to understand your suffering because this isn't your first life. You've been here before, and you were reincarnated. And you obviously did something in a past lifetime that you needed to come back to fix. It could be a mistake you made. That's one possibility. It could be a certain good deed that you could have done and you didn't do. That's another different possibility. Or maybe you just had to come back to help us, and you're perfect. But your soul had to re-enter this world and be reincarnated, go through what we call Gilgul Hanashamot, be transmigrated into a different body, to a different time, different body and life, in order to help someone else achieve what they had to achieve. And he heard it. Now, reincarnation is not a principle of our faith. And let me explain what I mean. This is a whole talk in of itself. But let me explain. You don't have to believe in reincarnation according to Judaism. You've got to believe in a God. You've got to believe the Torah is true. You've got to believe that Moses, the greatest prophet that lived. You've got to believe the Jewish people left Egypt. You've got to believe the Torah is the Torah. You've got to believe there's reward and punishment. You've got to believe in Mashiach. There's 30 principles of faith. One of those principles is not thou shalt believe in reincarnation. You want to believe, fine. You don't want to believe it, it's all Baba Mises. There are many great people through Jewish history, the Rambam and others. But Hagar on who says, nah, it's nonsense. Most other commentators say it is true. And in order to understand why tzaddik v'rala, why a righteous person goes through terrible things, this is one of the answers. Which you can't understand because you don't recall your past life. And you don't know how this suffering is really here to undo some terrible deed which is implanted in your soul from a previous life. You don't have that scope. God has that scope. He can see all of history, past, present, future. That's actually the name of God. Yud with a Hey, with a Vav with a Hey, which is 3 words. Haya was, Hova is, Yeah will be. When you take those 3 words and crunch them into one, it becomes the name of God. So holy, we say Ado with a Noi, right? The Yud with a Hey, with a Vav with a Hey. That's a contraction because God has a form. That means God right now is in the Garden of Eden. God right now is in the Holocaust. God right now is here with us. And God right now is Mashiach in the future world. God is beyond time and space. We are, however, mortals, and we are trapped in this thing called life. We don't have that perspective. So we don't know what we could have done in the past that makes us come back into this life in order to fix up a mess we made in the past life. Whether we come back as a human, or according to some commentators like Pele Yoetz and others, as an animal. As a bird, as a cat, a dog, a gorilla, a fish. Who knows? I got no clue. If I had a clue, I'd make a lot more money than I am right now, I'll tell you. So there are 5 possible responses to the intellectual, not emotional question of why bad things happen to good people. I think the only theme that I can get out of it is, it's not coincidence. It's part of a larger plan. Most of it's man-made, but God still has allowed it to happen. So we have to understand that God did allow that to occur. Whether it's losing a coin, losing your keys, getting stuck in traffic, flat tire, all the rest of it. Our reaction to what happens to us really says a lot about how we accept it to the highest level, which we're not at. Of Aaron, Moses' older brother, who was the chief rabbi in Egypt, really, who was able to stay silent while somehow digesting these ideas, and maybe more we're not even aware of, and able to accept them. That's all I gotta say on this topic, because I have no more. Questions, thoughts, comments on anything we discussed tonight? Yeah.
So is there any thoughts that after we pass away and we go to heaven and we find out why?
Oh yes, yes. We are told very clearly. Everything will become clear. There's a big question actually, that terrible things happen. Maybe the people in the next world can, come back and intercede on our behalf. Let's say they had that ability, which some say they do, some say they don't. But let's say they could. They say they don't want to, because they got a perspective that this is so good they don't want to get involved. There's another idea, which I didn't mention, I must mention it now, since you said that. There's an idea that they rejoice when righteous people go through suffering and die. There's a great rejoicing in heaven, which ends up coming down to this world and actually impacting the world in a better way. So actually the death of the righteous actually brings a kapara, an atonement to the world. Not that they chose death, but somehow just entering that world itself brings rejoicing to the souls they meet up in the next world, family, friends, and actually ends up somehow impacting this world. The Meshech Chochmah says such a thing.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and I agree to an extent. But I have an example. Very recently, there was, I don't know if you saw in the news, there was this trip. NYU did a trip to Ecuador, I think it was, and with a bunch of nursing students and pre-med students. I don't know if it was Ecuador, wherever it was. And there was a horrible bus crash, and 20 pre-med, a bunch of kids were hurt, but there were 2 girls that died. 2 Jewish girls. One of them was a Jewish girl, Danielle Mofson, who was part of the modern Orthodox community here in New York.
Yeah.
And apparently, I knew the family, and I know her sister's an amazing girl, so sweet. But apparently, as I read stories online about this girl, she was so incredible and so much inspired people. And I was able to see via Facebook and my social media outlets the good that her death brought. So many, marathons, challah baking, tzedakah, tehillim centers, learning. It was so beautiful to see. And I see that bigger picture. But what about her beautiful soul that can no longer live? What about her? She can't have kids anymore. What about her parents? It did all that good, but what about her? We don't see that?
We don't see that. Maybe we'll one day. But one thing is for sure, without doubt, she had a highly elevated soul. If a child is taken, I've heard big rabbis say this about just as atrocious or worse things that have happened, and said these were very high souls. We don't know why, but they came to this world for a short amount of time. By the way, they don't have to live. They don't have to live. I hear, because we have this perspective. My wife, we are blessed with children. She had a miscarriage, which is very common among the Orthodox community, because like 1 in 4 ends up being a miscarriage anyway, statistic or something like that. So it happens. And she was upset, obviously. It was after a couple of kids. I can imagine a person who has no kids and goes through that, but it was tough. We had a life to get back to. I know people don't have lives to get back to, and even worse, because as a child who's a child of birth. So I called my Rebbe, Rabbi Zimmerman, I forget this. He was living in America at that point. I studied him for many years, and he was very consoling. And I called him up. I wanted to be consoled over this, and he said something very interesting. He says, "Make no mistake, even a fetus in the womb has a certain amount of life force inside it, and even that gets a kapara, gets an atonement by being in this world and dying. Even a fetus in the womb, how much more to someone who came to this world, experienced life and died. Even a fetus in the womb is important information, because we may know people, it shouldn't happen to anyone here, it shouldn't happen to anyone, If it does, you should know that it happened for a reason, it's not coincidence, and even the fetus has to come into this world for a short amount of time, and its soul was impacted by being just in this world, even as a fetus, and then into the next world. It could have got a tikkun, and on a person who lose it, it shows the parents of this person are extremely great people, that God chose them to bring this child to this world for a short amount of time. Lo aleinu, I don't want to go through it, no one should go through it, but make no mistake, it says more about the parents, how great they are, that God chose them to allow this child to be for a short amount of time. So if they're even like Down syndrome kids, so right, some societies, you get rid of them, you neglect them. We see them, if you're able to, as a blessing, and the parents that have to bring. Right, obviously, we're dealing with a soul that's so elevated and so incredible that they don't have to do too much. Come into this world, they have limited, they're full of light and joy. You met these kids, right? It's just pure soul, right? There's like nothing physical. They just like enjoy life. They just like, it's like they just come into this world. They have to do a little function. They move on. Why those parents were chosen, I got no clue. But they must be great people. That we do know. Okay, we'll stop over there. There's more classes tonight. Thank you all very, very much for being with us for this very tough